Richard, Sarah, excuse me.
It's been too long.
William, lovely to meet you. Hey, Richard, so good to see
Hi,
you.
Christine. Yeah, it's lovely to see you.
I'm glad you're here. You'll definitely be able to make a contribution, I'm sure. And Sarah, I'd love to see your face. Hopefully I can see your face. Oh, yay. People coming in. Hey, Colleen, good morning. Moving my, yeah, look at me. I'm in a different location.
Where are you?
The familiars would know that I actually have a whole setup, and but yesterday, guess what happened? I have two internet service providers. I have two. So I have, in case one goes down, the other one can come into action. One of them is Starlink, because the local one is terrible. Well, yesterday they both went down. And so Starlink are non-responsive, which is great. You pay all that money for a billionaire to get more billions, and they don't have any human services. So they're non-responsive. So I have over there, we've moved my whole thing to another room, and I have over there my iPhone in the house getting the strongest signal I can get. So I'm hotspotting this call off my phone. And if there are tech issues, I apologize. That's, you just got to laugh. Kelly is back. Wonderful to see you. Sarah, I'm hoping Neil will still see. So we had about, the last time I looked, we had about 25 people. Yay, Sarah, good to see you. 25 people register for the call, which means we'll probably get maybe 18 if we're lucky. Good to meet Ilsa. Is that right? Have I got your pronunciation right? Sarah, Bernice is there. Oh no, it's Candy. I get to meet Candy. Hey, Bernice, good to see you. There you go, Candy. Lovely to meet you in person. I'm so glad. Colleen. So thank you for being here. We've got about an hour and a half to gallop through this material. Just to give you a little bit of context, because I did this morning as well, and Kelly experienced this morning's session, so she can answer all the questions. So what I wanted to do particularly for this conversation was look at, it was a week ago today, almost in this instant, actually it was this moment that we knew that that a rapist was going to occupy the White House. And we knew that that was the case, and exactly a week ago. And so there's a lot of commentary around what happened, why it happened, et cetera, et cetera. And some brilliant stuff. I'll refer to some of those things. But the reason that I wanted to convene this conversation was I really wanted to convene the conversation to have a look at this from the lens of Syntropic World. So let me, for those of you who are not familiar with Syntropic World, we're about 5 years old now, but so way back in my 20s, which was a long time ago, I was introduced to the work of Buckminster Fuller, and he's Syntropic World kind of has its lineage to Bucky Fuller's work. Hey, Debbie, good to see you. So Bucky Fuller spent the majority of his life wanting to understand the working principles of the universe, the operating principles of our natural systems, the operating principles of our home planet. He wanted to understand those so that he could then apply those principles to pretty much everything. But his focus was more particularly on things like architecture, in city design, motor vehicle design, housing design, so infrastructure. He was more known for his thinking around geometry design, spatial design, and so on. I've spent most of my life applying his the same tools, models of how universe operates to how we coordinate humans, how we bring people together. Interestingly, the term geometry means the study of relationships. And so any of us know that we have significant global issues, to put it mildly, and it's going to take people coming together and working collectively and collaboratively. How do we do that elegantly? How do we do that in a way that enables brilliant agency of individuals? Because all of us are brilliant in some way. Brilliant agency of individuals to come together and work collectively without shredding each other in whatever form that looks like, so that the ecologies that we create are synergistic, which literally the outcome is far greater than any of us could do on our own. And so that's where I've spent my time. And after an existential crisis, it's kind of like the harder existential crisis that most of us go through at least once. After the existential crisis in my late 50s, my mid to late 50s, I decided that if I was going to re-engage with life, then it was going to be to do my life's work without compromise. And I think there's something beautiful that happens when we reach that point. It's like, I'm old enough and I've been around the block enough that I don't actually give a shit what people think. I'm ready to do the real work and to speak to the real issues and so on. And so Syntropic World was born as a response to two famous quotes. One of them is Bucky's: "Don't try and change the existing system, build new models that make the existing obsolete." I'm going to be clear about that, because a lot of people, when they hear that, they don't hear what I actually mean. What I actually mean is, don't try and change the existing system. So the existing system, which I'll speak about more, the existing system is everything from how our monetary, financial, economic, governance, healthcare, you name it, any system that we have, housing, blah, 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 any system that we have, land use, agriculture, any system that we have, if it's doing damage, then we're not trying to fix it. We're not trying to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic of the current system. We're literally wanting to build a new boat that makes the current system obsolete. So I just want to be clear of the level that I'm talking about. The other quote that inspired this is Audre Lorde's: "The master's tools will not dismantle the master's house." The master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. Clearly, Audre Lorde, for those who don't know her, she has a far greater right to speak of master in a particular lexicon, the master of slaves, enslaved, and so on. So there is a heritage to that right to speak of that I don't have, but in the current operating system that we're all at effect of, many of us have an embodied experience of what it feels like to be in the master's house. And the very simple, banal, but very pertinent example is, I can't reach a human to fix my Starlink, which is a multi-million, I don't know the worth of it or whatever, but it's part of a billion dollar company. And there is no human that I can reach to help me with that. I feel trapped by a master in a system that I really don't want to be a part of. You know, that's just, it's a very scratch on the surface, almost insignificant example, but I'm sure you all relate to that to some degree. So So this is the sort of background of Syntropic World. And so I wanted to use this opportunity to really look at how we apply some of the models from that I teach. And we've got many people here who are graduates of many of the programs in Syntropic World, but how we use those to think about and experience and so on. First of all, the world that is unfolding right before our eyes, where it seems perfectly acceptable for one of the most powerful humans on the planet to be a convicted felon and a rapist. And, which I say that, and it's just like, am I in some other universe? Will I wake up from this? And so how that, and then what would be a syntropic response to what we do? So that's kind of the frame. We have the wonderful Cindy Ford, who is probably going to contribute some of her thoughts around this as well. But I want to give you, and I'll introduce Sydney in just a moment, but I want to make sure that this is, I'm going to do some talking and give some frameworks. It is my perspective. It is a syntropic lens. It is not perfect. It is not the whole thing. It is a conversation. It is a framework. So there is openness for questions, for poking the framework, for all of that sort of stuff. This is completely allowed in this space. I appreciate and welcome that. It's really simple. I've got a huge screen here, even bigger than my normal one. You can use the raise hand things, which I don't know how to do, or you can just raise your hand because I'll see it. And also the chat, I don't normally read the chat. Colleen, maybe if there's something in the chat that I need to see, could draw attention to that, that would be great. But ask the questions. Some people use chat a lot, so go for it, but ask the questions. And yeah, so that's kind of where we are. So I'd like to introduce you to Cindy, who's got quite a bit to say about some of this piece. She doesn't even know what I'm doing. But there'll be a moment where she has a very powerful contribution to this. So if you just want to say a couple of words, Cindy, before I go into sort of background.
Yeah, hi. It's just really lovely to be here amongst some wonderful old friends. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Richard. Hi, Colleen. And Kelly. It's just so lovely to see you all here. I don't know. I don't know. I've been told to show up, and you obviously have a plan for me, Christine. So I'm really happy to go along with that. But yeah, I do systemically. I have a lot of.
Yeah.
I do have some thoughts of how we got here, and I guess that's possibly what Christine would like me to speak about, and I'd be very happy to do that.
Yeah, and also I wanted to acknowledge Richard has been a friend of mine for a very long time. Richard Hames, he is a wise systems thinker, and it's always worth listening to what Richard's got to say. So I'm not sure what he's got to say, but it's worth listening to. But equally, there is an opportunity for people to speak here. And so if you have any confusion, questions, curiosities, or otherwise, my hope as well is that by the end of the conversation that we'll bring in some possibility for a future and how each of us can begin to shape that. So yeah, that's kind of where we're going. Before I get started, any questions at all, or anything that you want to say, anyone wants to say? Bearing in mind that this morning I presented this to a predominantly United States-based audience. So, which was very fun, and it was, it was good. It was great. It was a great experience. So, and I did this morning also have some audio problems. So hopefully I haven't got any audio problems, because people who have been around me enough know that I use this to draw. And so let me know, because what was happening this morning is every time I was turning, the audio was cutting out. There's bandwidth issues and so on. So through a syntropic lens, there is a principle of principles. This is training and practice, because in syntropic world, we're talking about new models, new maps, new mindsets, new tools, but it's not theory. We have to live it and apply it. Otherwise, like, let's just sit down and read a novel and have a cup of tea. It's applied. This is applied work. So the first principle that I'm going to which and it's a misused word. So one of the other principles, pattern integrity of syntropic world, is to understand the source of an idea, the source of anything, the source code of money, the source code of economics, the source code of capitalism, the source code of, all of these sort of things. So the word synergy means that the behavior of the whole cannot be determined by an examination of the parts separately. We are educated in a world of parting, P-A-R-T, parts, parts, parts. So when you look at what happened last week, it's very easy to get into the parts. And there are many of them, and they're all valid and often also all painful. So parts, identity, race, economic disadvantage, mythologies around fear and propagation of that and so on. These are all significant parts. But in order for us to really have a syntropic response, we need to go to the whole, the biggest possible picture we can manage. Bucky Fuller would say, start with the universe first, which is the biggest possible picture that we can manage. Clearly, no one can manage the universe. Well, I can't, because it's a lot. It's a lot. And so part of the discipline behind going to the whole first is training in both whole systems point of view, but also training in becoming a comprehensivist versus a specialist. Now, be clear, if I need to have brain surgery, I'm going to go to a specialist brain surgeon. I'm not going to go to a generalist practitioner. So there is definitely a place for specialization. But in reference to the type of issues that we have that we're addressing, it's a comprehensive overview. So synergy asks us to do that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint an incomplete, it is always going to be incomplete, an incomplete history, not history, I'm not going to go all the way, but an incomplete history of the three major, and they're from this incomplete perspective, ways of engaging and seeing the world. And this is important. And so we have the one that we know, Western. I'm just going to call it Western. It's a bad word, but we're talking about the origins from back before that, but the Greeks and the Romans and the Platos and the blah blah blah, and then all the way through from Plato's philosophers that we've all revered, down to Newton and all of the other philosophers, and blah blah blah. And the whole Western mindset framing that is what animates the current world that we live in at the moment. So we have that. I'll say more about this, and Cindy can speak to more about that. And then over here we have the cynic, and over here I'm just going to put, for example, I am standing on the unceded territories of the Yukon-Bear people. This land that I'm standing on has a 60,000 year history. 60,000 years. There is no other culture that we're aware of, I could be corrected, that has that type of history of a continuous lineage of a culture. So we have this Western, and I'm interested, I want to hear from you, and I'll give you one other principle. So synergy is looking at that. As I mentioned, one of the other key sort of principles behind syntropic world is you need to understand the source idea. I call it the source idea because any idea, including us as individuals, because we're an idea, any idea at the moment of its inception as an idea has what Bucky would call a pattern integrity. What is a pattern integrity? Pattern integrity is the thing that makes you unique. It's the thing that makes you respond the way you do. It's the thing that if you're a parent and you have two children that are biologically, genetically identical from both parent pool, are completely unique in their expression. It is the thing that has you fight for this and step over that. It is in an idea itself, there's a pattern integrity to it. So every word has an etymological root that carries the pattern integrity function of that word's expression. Am I making sense? Yeah. When we're looking at any issue, it is looking at the whole of it and then also looking at the pattern integrity of the source idea. So if we want to understand money, we need to look at the pattern integrity of the source idea. We need to understand the origin story of money. We need to understand the origin story of capitalism. We need to understand the origin story of the foundation of colonized United States, the origin story of the foundation of colonized Australia, because there's a pattern integrity to it in that origin story that is manifest as that story is brought to life. Does anyone dare guess what the origin story, the pattern integrity of the Western mind is? The one that we live in. Just throw some words out. This one.
Evangelical.
Sorry, go ahead, Jules.
I was going to say mechanistic.
Great answer. Yeah, mechanistic.
Evangelical.
Anyone else?
Scientific realism.
Realism, scientific realism. Is that two words or separate?
Yeah, 2 words.
Okay, as in, yeah, and everyone forgive me, my spelling becomes very curiously interesting when I write in front of people. So, you know what I mean. Anyone else?
Cartesian logic, Christine.
Sorry.
Cartesian logic.
Cartesian logic.
Duality.
Yes.
Duality, black and white.
And Kimberly, you said something?
Productivity.
Logic. Productivity. There's another one that you're all missing.
Superiority?
Sorry?
Superiority,
Superiority. Yeah.
particularly towards nature.
Patriarchy.
Superiority. Yeah. Domination. Domination. Yes,
Domination.
superiority, domination. There is another piece to this that is incredibly important. And I only realized this. This is how life works. I only realized this somewhere during last year because I've been a curious, curious person all my life. You know, I love to look at questions, answer questions, and so on. And so I've studied the Greeks and the Burman and the philosophies and the et cetera, I was educated for 6 years in applied science, you know, so I have this sort of like this mindset, but I realized last year, surprise, surprise, that almost 100%, there are some minor exceptions, but almost 100% of the philosophical and scientific background of this is generated by one gender. I love men. This is not that. This is not about that at all. But this is one expression in the world. Yeah, Kimberly, I'll come. One view in the world. One. And anyone who's been around the block long enough knows that the way men and women think and respond is different. But all of this and all of our response is male gendered and continues to be male gendered and continues to be male gendered. I now, when I see, and I was on a call or watched the replay of someone I admire deeply and a great thinker and a beautiful human and all of those intentions. But when I'm listening to one gendered response, speaking to one gendered response, referencing one gendered response, there's something in me that goes, that isn't the answer. In actual fact, I can't listen to that sincerely anymore. Not only are they missing gender, they're missing these other perspectives. Yeah, so Kimberly first, then Richard.
To your point about gender, I've recently learned that the great philosopher Socrates had a teacher. And do you know who his teacher was? Aphasia. And who was Aphasia? A woman. But she was written out of the history books in the same way that Eunice Ingham, who discovered that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere actually heats up the earth in a blanket. She too was written out of the scientific histories. But only a year later, a man by the name of John, and I forget his surname, took her papers and published it and gained all the credit. So once Christianity came in, any paganism roots that we had, certainly here in Britain and anywhere else, where deity, goddess was revered, the feminine was revered, we were written out of the history books. And we've been fighting to claim our place back as leaders, as philosophers, as scientists, as mathematicians, as artists ever since.
Yeah. But this can't operate with a monological lens. It can't. It's because another principle that lives in Syntropic is the principle of polarity. So this, to put it really simply, polarity is required for existence. Polarity is required for existence. We have to have a positive and a negative charge. This is for any life to hold its shape. If there is a singularity, it's a collapse, it's a nothing, it's a no thing. Polarity is required for existence. And yet the world that we currently have created has eliminated, and I'm only referring right now to the Western world and the elimination of the female voice. But that's not the end of the issue, because we come back and go, what about the rest of humanity? What about the Indigenous and the people who don't look like this? What about those people? And what about their voices? And what about the voices? And Richard, I know you can speak to this from a Chinese point of view. The wonderful, one of the, there's some books that just change your life. And so Jeremy Lentz, The Patterning Instinct. I don't know whether you can see that, but Jeremy, The Patterning Instinct. This is one of my favorite books, A Cultural History of Humanity's Search for Meaning, because what he did, he went back to sort of like the origins of humans and clearly mapped the different worldview mindsets. And in my country at the moment, we're told that China is this enemy person and be wary of them and blah, 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 fear-mongering. Now, I want to be clear that pretty much every nation state has good parts and bad parts. China is definitely not the patron saint of treating of what is it, other humans. They do some horrible things to people, and they also have the scariest surveillance thing that I could ever even imagine. But this whole pattern integrity of China is harmony, and which Jeremy sort of speaks in Neo-Confucianism, which when I read about Neo-Confucianism, which is an ecology of examining and living in life, it's not a religion, which is over 1,000 years old. I'd never heard of it, and you can't buy books on it. But I think it's the smartest synthesis of existence of life that I've read. But we don't pay any attention to that. In actual fact, the attention that we give over here is terror. So Richard, I know you had your hand up, which was a while back.
Oh, I was just going to, well, I was actually going to say more or less the same thing as Kimberly said, which I agree. I mean, right across science, the arts, every discipline, you get the feminine voice, the female eroded, written out of history.
Yeah.
But the other point I was going to make in that context was today, and especially in terms of the topic you've got today, in terms of Trump becoming president, is the gerontocracy part of male is actually the loudest voice. The gerontocracy has the megaphone, the loudest megaphone. And that really is a problem because people of my generation are simply not getting out of the way. We've caused the problems, but we also think we have the solutions, which is absolutely insane.
Yeah, the arsonist is brought in to fix the fire. Yeah. So, you know, so we're missing, and this is a very reductionist, and I mentioned before that we're looking at the whole, not the part. So this, I'm recognizing my reductionism here, but we're missing all of this gorgeousness of other contributions. We're missing the incredible quality of people in the Indigenous space whose whole worldview was around relationship to land, to the birds, to the trees, to each other, to the sacredness of life expressed differently. Very, very different to this. Very, very different to this. And so when we look at a system that is thousands of years of history in patriarchy, is it any wonder, and I've actually written, for those of you who read my Beauty of Beginnings, I've written the Beauty of Beginnings for tomorrow, I've already written it, and it addresses that, are we even, why are we even thinking that a rapist in the White House is an issue? And I know that's shocking, but in most countries where rape happens all the time, and I'm not just talking about women, but where rape happens all the time, it is rarely prosecuted. The person that has been raped is usually persecuted. And then we have a capitalist system that is designed to pretty much rape everything it can. The earth, humanity, goodness, etc., etc. And so from one symbolic level, a rapist in the White House is actually probably one of the most powerful, I hope, symbols of the last days of this. Yeah. So through this as well came capitalism, monetary control. One of the things that Bucky did, which I really admired, he called it speculative prehistory, but he really studied history a lot. And he believed that the further back you drew the arrow, the further forward you could potentially predict the future. Interestingly, he was pretty good at predicting, because in his work, Critical Path, which was published in 1983, it was the book that was published before he died. He, on page 82, I think he says, eventually the Western governments will be forced to bail out the big industries, you know, the capital or whatever. It was this quote that was, you know, we all know that it happened. It didn't happen until 2008. But anyway, out of this, we have the systems of things like capitalism. And so if we use the principles of syntropic world and go back to the source idea and the pattern integrity of capitalism, I am going to propose that capitalism and human rights and democracy are incompatible. Incompatible. If we want human rights and if we want democracy, it will not happen under this system, for the simple reason that the pattern integrity and the design features of this system are working very well, thank you for those who are enjoying it, but have infinite growth, market-based accumulation, poverty built in by design. Sorry, I'm losing my words. The incentives of capital, of capital are contradictory to the incentives for human rights, justice, and democracy. So that's a pretty big statement, but you know, so when we look at this, I'm going, it's not, and there's no way you can put this in a pretty dress and hope. This is rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic and hoping for a different outcome. We're not talking about conscious capitalism, green capitalism, regenerative capitalism. No, we're talking about something on the other side of this that's not socialism, communism, or anything else. It's something that we don't know in this world yet, that is probably known in other worlds already at a smaller scale. So nature does an amazing, an incredible, beautiful, exquisite job of utility and exchange, the complete circular economy and so on. So we have the models there, but it's not this. So if we then go from, this is the substrate of the world, and there are many different words for it, including the superorganism, Molochian, and so on. It's almost like it's a beast that has its own mechanistic driving generative function machinery, and it's gone beyond, potentially beyond human intervention. I want to be really clear that I don't believe that there is a mysterious cabal of men that do this, or an Illuminati, or any of that. No, I don't think any of that. First of all, I think the captains of this are so incapable of working with each other most of the time that they couldn't come together and meet and agree to a cup of tea. But this is sort of the operating system that we're currently in. And along comes the colonization of the United States. And I wrote about this in Syntropic Contemplations that went out on Sunday, if any of you read that. The pattern integrity of the source idea of the United States, again, I'm going to generalize, but there are sort of three keys that I saw in that, and they're very different to the ones in Australia. And I think there's a good recognition here, because you can see why different countries make different decisions, even countries operating in the Western system. So one of the pattern integrities of the United States is religious freedom. There is an incredibly powerful religious element to the United States of America. We don't have that in Australia, thank goodness. It's just like, it's very superficially there and people want to bring it back, but it's really not there at all. So we don't have that. Religious freedom, freedom from the king, so the freedom from the autocratic power. And interestingly, the king was the King of England, so it was freedom from that. You know, Australia, we still have the King of England. How lucky are we? So we got the king, because part of our pattern integrity is the empire, imperialist impulse is a nation building thing. And then the other piece that I think is very significant in the pattern integrity of post-colonial the United States is the cowboy. The cowboy represented by I can do whatever the hell I like, and I'm gun-toting, and I'm male-dominated, very masculine, very male-dominated, and I am just going to go and take and rape and take and rape and take and rape, whatever. And so the indigenous Indians in the Pacific Northwest had a term for the cowboys and the settler colonists, and they called it wetiko. They actually thought that these invading species were diseased, sick. How could anyone come into land and cut the trees and kill the animals and do the things that this mindset did to this beautiful, self-sustaining, regenerative society of culture? And so they viewed this as a disease, and I'm going to propose it still is a disease. It's alive and well because this is the generative system that we live under. The difference in Australia, just so that you have the contrast here, is the pattern integrity source idea of Australia. We had the imperialism, so it was a British colony. So there's the rank and pomp and ceremony of the imperial, which, and all of the horror that comes with that, which we know, the land is there for the taking. It's terra nullius, empty land, and what people, they're just objects to be removed, essentially. So that convicts, and the majority of the convicts, we can look at the what's going on in immigration. We can go back to the United States on this. People trying to escape, for the most part, all over the world, but people trying to escape abject poverty, oppression, war, famine, climate change. So people legitimately trying to create a life of betterment for themselves, which is only it's a trickle at the moment. It's about to become a flood. We look down on these people. The convicts of Australia largely were the similar type of people. They were, although all from Britain, so all white people. So the convicts were mostly petty thieves who were stealing loaves of bread to feed their kids because the economic situation in the UK was very bad. And so they were thrown on a boat and forced to go to a place so far away that it was mind-boggling. So that the convicts, and then we also had the landed gentry, the people coming to take their slice of this terra nullius. So back to the United States, and I'm going to open just a little bit and let Cindy, who's profoundly experienced in looking at the whole piece of colonization through history, but because this is the groundswell that has never been reconciled in the United States. It hasn't been reconciled in Australia. It hasn't been reconciled in almost every colony, to be honest. But Cindy, do you want to say anything about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, I think you've covered so much already, Christine. I don't have too much to add, but I do think that it is, as absolutely as you say, it's the pattern integrity that we're seeing playing out. I mean, the comments that everybody made at the beginning of this are really insightful. I'll just point, with the mechanistic worldview, the Cartesian worldview, even how science was used, Darwinian science. I'll just use as a keyword for that, the Enlightenment. I mean, that has just still not being challenged. I'm kind of, it is indicative almost, Christine, that you said it was only last year that you realized all the philosophy had been written in the Western world anyway, because that's certainly not the case in other places by men. But that to even challenge the age of enlightenment is a very dangerous thing to do in this in our world now. And yet the philosophers of the Enlightenment really the philosophy justified the practice of this huge scale genocide to take over countries, particularly, in America, 145 million people were killed. The official number is, this 8 million kind of wandering around here and there somewhere. So it was this terra nullius. the destruction of the land, the terraforming of the land, the domination of nature, the enslavement of other people. This was all justified by this philosophy that we still hold up as enlightening for us. So you've got the principal components of the Enlightenment, like Immanuel Kant. You know, he was a huge advocate of the hierarchy of humans, so the black human being at the bottom, and he's got this atrocious paragraphs in his writing of how, you know, blacks should be whipped and beaten, with what they should be whipped and beaten because of the thickness of their skin. The pain can't be felt if it's this type of birch rod or that type of whip. John Locke, another key figure of the Enlightenment, he wrote the slave constitutions for North Carolina, for Barbados. You know, this duality that you spoke to, Richard, is just totally embedded in that DNA of Western life and Western thought. The Enlightenment really applied to an elite group of white men. It didn't apply to women. When the Constitution of America was written, the Statue of Liberty is a woman, but women had no rights whatsoever. So it's a really profound psychological deformation that continues to this very day in order to justify the murder of so many people, of the terraforming, the whole reconstruction of the land. There has to be a story that's told that it's good to do this. You know, that you've got the white man's burden, the civilizing mission, the manifest destiny, and the religion. You know, when the conquistadores set off, it was the Pope that said, yes, go and get that gold. And you've had that sanctioned almost by every president and every prominent thinker. In America, we are doing God's work. How many wars have we heard now that are done in the name of God? And so this is, it is the Wetico thing. It's a deeply psychological distortion. James Baldwin talks about it brilliantly in his work, I Am Not Your Negro. You have to construct this thing that is so inferior, that so deserves to be wiped off the face of the earth. You can see it happening in Israel right now. That needs to be subjugated, that needs to be whipped. Even the scientist Linnaeus, when you looked at the classification of, he's famous for classifying plants, he also classified humans and ranked them, the white at the top, and then the yellow, then the red, and then the black, and prescribed their characteristics and how they should be treating. These are still figures that are held up as huge shapers of our worldview, of our science, and they're still revered. I'm not saying everything they did was wrong, but it's you can't have that in your pattern of how you see and understand life. And as Christine's saying, this compartism, it is a kind of mental unwellness, imbalance, out of balance with nature. Even the interpretation on Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest was used to, which isn't really what he said at all, but it was used, and I won't get into that because it's too long, but it was used to justify this wiping out of what was considered inferior species. Nature would have done it anyway. We're just accelerating the process. So it's so embedded in our psyches as people who grew up in the West, and it is so, and it's spread across the world, many parts of the world, and it's deeply, deeply rooted in the American psyche, to the point that if you challenge that, Kehinde Andrews, a Black historian, he challenged the Enlightenment, the amount of deaths, the threats he received were, immeasurable. And then Hollywood kicks in, so you've already had the mainstream philosophies and the religions getting behind this destruction of other people on earth. And then you have this myth-making machine that comes in on steroids, which is, the media industry that, I'm talking about Hollywood, it's spanned out through everything now, to Twitter, to social media, but they're so profound when you talk about making America great again. People see John Wayne, they see that ultimate cowboy and his horse and all the good things he was doing, ridding the land of those pesky, violent, savage Indians. He went out and he made America great. You had to be able to carry your guns because you had to get rid of those violent savages that were coming for your land, which was your land because you'd gone in there and you had taken it because you were fulfilling the white man's burden. And you have to have your guns, because those terrible, ignorant Negroes who may get up and attack you at any minute for no reason at all, not the fact they might be slightly angry, even though that people, you know, Trump still uses that rhetoric. The immigrants, they're coming in here, they're violent, psychopathic murderers, he called them. They're going to take everything. The irony of that being that it was violent, psychopathic murderers that took the United States and many of the other colonies, and then they had to have their guns to defend themselves against people who really tried to fight back, but didn't have, you know, didn't have the superior weaponry to do so. So, you know, they've inverted, and Trump does that in every single speech. He inverts what he's doing to people and to the system, to, you know, to individuals, to what, you know, in actual fact, that's what he is doing. And people are so used to those psychological tricks that they don't even recognize that's what's happening to them. There's a fantastic First Nations woman called Namontine Nkimo, who wrote a letter to world leaders a few years ago. She's an Ecuadorian Amazonian leader, and she said, you have Kawari, she uses the word. This is why we don't have the language. Wetiko is a very powerful word. It is this psychology of why, you know, why would you destroy entire ecosystems? Why would you cut up the system that supports you? You know, it has to be a deep psychological illness. We can shortcut that with the it's an Ojibwe word, wetiko. The Kawari word is the Ecuadorian Amazonian word is Kawari, which means power without wisdom. And that, you know, we are in an age now where there are people like, you know, the leaders like Trump. They have huge power, but they have no wisdom of how to use it, and they are just the proponents. They are, the power that they wield is handed to them by the legacy of you know, of a system that is just built on genocide and violence, and retelling the narrative to turn horror into heroism. And I think that's why you know, you see the you know, research, the appeal of Trump in the United States. It's not something that's ever gone away, that we were ever moving out of. It's just there. As soon as it's legitimized again, as it did as with Trump in 2016, it rears its head to the surface. We have the same issue in Britain post-Brexit. We have again that legitimization of othering. We've had more the heavy rise of the far right here, and, you know, horrendous riots. So it really is a systemic will that we have to look at how we got here, and then rethink, unpick our stories, and create a narrative that's compatible, a philosophy, a belief system that is compatible with life on Earth. Otherwise, we are stuck in this cycle that sees Trump coming back every 4 years or so, hacking away more and more until there's nothing left. And maybe from the collapse, we do get the resurrection. But let's hope to God we don't have to go to total collapse, and we can reimagine enough of what it means to be a human being, given global nature of our understanding of ourselves now, or the possibility to do so.
Thanks, Cindy. Richard, you had something to say?
Yeah, just on, I mean, Cindy, I think you shouldn't have skipped over the Darwin influence, and how Herbert Spencer took that and embedded the whole notion of competition in society. When someone like Peter Kropotkin, who no one's ever heard of, was working in Siberia and saw cooperation within and amongst species.
And Lynn Margulis as well.
I think that's important. It's, again, it comes back to the male megaphone and who has the loudest voice.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, thank you, Richard, it's just a matter of time. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be doing here, but I was trying to plot everything quickly. Yeah.
Cindy's always worth listening to, particularly on this subject where she has much more depth than I do. So just to sort of, because I want to be sure that we spend a little bit of time on what can we do. So, you know, into this mix with capitalism, then we get Thatcher and Reagan, you know, wheeling out the neoliberal map. tax breaks for the rich, trickle down economics, anti-regulation, eroding every single check and balance. Let me just ask you on the eroding every single check and balance, because we all like to feel that we have liberty and freedom. But who knows that if you don't have some form of structure or architecture or discipline or container in which to operate, that you're actually dysfunctional? Anyone have that at a personal experience? We need to, have someone. Anyway, so, I just, you're probably up with the news as well, that it's called DOGE, D-O-G-E, the Department of something or other government. Anyway, so Elon Musk and the other guy, someone said we need two heads to sack thousands of people in the government. But anyway, so Trump has just appointed Elon Musk and this other dude who ran for president, spoke against Trump very loudly, but now they're besties, of course, to hack out the US government. Now, there are some things that probably need a little bit of cleaning up, but what we do know is going to happen is it's going to be decimated because the neoliberals and the libertarians do not want any form of regulation. I want to put this into a context though, because just so that we've got some reference points here. $50 trillion was moved from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. 50 trillion. I have no ability to comprehend what that is, just to be clear. It's just a fancy sounding bunch of words. 50 trillion was moved from the bottom 90% to the top 1% between 1981 and 2021. But who are the bad guys? The welfare cheats. The welfare cheats. I'm being facetious here. In Australia, we had a system called robo-debt, which approximately 2,000 people were potentially suicided as a result of this monster that sent people that were on welfare payments saying that they owed money to the government. And in almost all cases, it was incorrect. So 50 trillion has moved from the bottom 90% of humanity to the top 1% between 1981 and 2021. But let's point out the welfare cheats, shall we? There is a mechanism behind this madness, which is I was listening to, and if anyone is interested, I follow Heather Cox Richardson. She's an American historian. I think she's very brilliant at what she does. She's become quite well known during this period. And one of the things that I love about Heather is that she writes about the current moment and then she references history and gives perspective to, oh, we've been here before. And whether you're from the United States or somewhere else, you can read it and go, oh, I know what you're talking about. So it makes some of the things happening, you go, oh, we have actually been to some of these places before. But anyway, Heather was speaking to Jon Stewart, comedian Jon Stewart, on a show that he did last week just after the election results. And she used this model, which I think is really powerful, to frame this system. So just imagine that we have 10 people. Most of those people, they just want to get by. They want to have a good income, a house to live in, food on the table, some opportunity to take a holiday. That it's not a hugely ambitious life. Most people, they're in that. However, of these 10 people, 2 want to be in power. The 2 want to be in power. So the mechanism for those 2 to be in power is to convince 6 people that the 2 at the bottom are the enemy. That is the whole game. If I can convince, I want to be in power, I need to convince the 6 people that the bottom 2 people in that 10 are the enemy, dangerous, fearing, whatever it is, then I can maintain my power. That's how power works. I believe that one of the best books of the last 5 years that I've read is Isabel Wilkinson's Caste. The reason I love this is because she takes systemic entrenched racism and takes it to another level, which has to do with pretty much every human. And so if no matter where you've come from, no matter what color your skin is, no matter your economic circumstances, whatever else like that, people are trying to climb in this mindset up a ladder. You know, we've got to get to the rung of a ladder. This is what almost everyone who gets on a boat and risks their lives with their kids, they just want a little bit better than what they've left. That's a form of a ladder. And when you reach a rung on a ladder and someone is trying to take your rung off you, that's what the power brokers aim to do, is keep people in fear about someone taking or usurping your position on the rung of the ladder. That's what the horrible immigrants are doing. That's, you know, this whole mythology. So it's to keep people conquered, keep them divided. But I love Heather's simple map of 10 people. 2 want to be in power. Their whole job is to have 6 of those 10 people hate on the bottom 2. And the bottom 2, who it is, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Pick. It's irrelevant. But they're eating the cats and dogs. It's irrelevant. Let's go for whatever is the easiest. And so this is the pot. And so in all of this, the opportunity for people to feel like they can have the basics, healthcare, a house, a living wage, adequate, has almost been completely eroded. You cannot take 90% of the capital and put it in the 1% and do that persistently and continuously. You cannot keep doing that and expect that the majority of people aren't going to feel like they've been sucker punched. And from my perspective, part of the issue of why more Black people and more Latinos voted for Donald Trump this time round, like he had an increase in those populations, is because the Democratic Party looks like this. The Democratic Party looks like business as usual, status quo. And while their source idea largely came from the labor movement and rights and human rights, they're completely captured by this. And completely captured by the 4 key powers, which is energy, technology, military industrial complex, and the media. Those are the 4 key powers. And if you ever want to go to the synergistic response of anything, look at what the 4 key powers are doing. The tech titans want to decimate tech regulation because they want to do whatever the hell I like. If you want to read anything worth reading about what's happening in the tech space, I'm a huge fan of Cory Doctorow's work. He's in the process of publishing his next book, which is titled Enshittification. Enshittification, the word is actually now in Wikipedia. If you look at enshittification in Wikipedia, you'll get a definition of what that is. But you look at where is the power around energy and the decisions. We know what's happening there. You only have to look at the family photo of COP29 to see the and where it's being held, to know where the power around energy is. Where is the power in technology? Well, one of them is Stephen King, the author, said is the First Lady of the White House, even though it's Elon Musk. He called Elon Musk the First Lady of the White House. So the tech titans, the media have a lot, and you know, it's not just the traditional media, it's definitely social media, which includes the tech titans and the military industrial complex.
Christine,
Yeah.
Can I potentially add one for you to think about, a fifth, which increasingly is becoming as powerful, if not more powerful, than in the industrial military complex, and that is Big Pharma and how it's captured the medical profession, and that's increasingly going to be a problem for us. When you get a non-elected body like the World Health Organization deciding how things shall be and mandated autocratically by governments all around the world, that's a real problem. Yeah.
Nice thought. Well, from this morning to this afternoon, I added the military industrial complex. So we'll add the Big Pharma as well. But you know, part of the discipline as well is to look at what is the power behind the perceived power, because the perceived power isn't where the power lies. And so the Democratic Party is a representation of this, captured by capitalism. And as I mentioned, you can't have human rights and democracy in a capitalist system. They're contradictory, they can't work together. And so people looked at more of the same, and this is oversimplification, but in this field, in this milieu that we've painted over the last hour, people looked at more of the same and saw someone who, even though that someone is brilliant at spellcasting and creating images of a world, looked at more of the same and go, don't want that. We'll go for the rebellious rebel that's speaking to our unreconciled identities, speaking to the sea of cowboy white men in America and, you know, some of the black men who were brought up on this mythology, which is very patriarchal, and find themselves surrounded by brilliant women who can earn more than them and have completely usurped their identity. How do they respond to that? How do they respond to that? There is no, this is how we grow a new generation of men that can partner with women. You know, it's just like they're lost at sea. So we have in that mix, this represented status quo, and Donald Trump represented anything that was up the nose of the status quo. And because there's so much pain going on in here at the level of communities and so on, that was the better option. So that's kind of like the summary of how, you know, where we're at. And this rise, by the way, of authoritarianism, this is happening all around the world. This is not just happening in the United States. It is happening. I've always loved the work of Hannah Arendt, some of the great philosophers, women, who have studied and continue to study authoritarian regimes, banality of evil, those type of things. And these things have a map. That's almost the tragedy of this. There is here's how you build an authoritarian regime. Here's the steps that you take and the mechanism to state. We only have to look back in history of, you know, of the world wars and see there's the blueprint for authoritarianism. And we're pretty much writing the script at the moment. It's being played out in front of us on our watch. So Kelly, I'm going to get your hand response, and then we'll look at, you know, what does a tropic world do for this?
I was just trying to apply what you've been talking about with some of the principles that we learn within the masterclass, and you always talk about the processional effect of things. And
Yes.
so, yeah, so this really is what was the thing that was missing? What was the processional effect for Trump to be voted in, right? So he's now
Yeah.
filled a void or a vacuum. So that is the processional effect that you teach about.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for
Mhm.
those who don't know what that means, is procession is one of the principles that we cover, one of the ways that universe works, which is to every action, there is a reaction at 90 degrees to that action. The simple example of that is drop a stone into a pond, you get ripples at 90 degrees. The other example of that we all know is that we are standing where we are on a world that's spinning very, very fast, and we're not being flung into the universe because of the precessional effect of gravity on the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun. So precession. So what Kimberly was raising here is that to every action, there is a precessional effect. And if you have a look at the unreconciled polar shadow of this world, so it has ignored 52% of the population for a start, just gender. It's ignored other worldviews completely and absolutely, wiped them out of relevance. It's ignored that. It is linear, mechanistic, separated from nature, all of the things that we know and feel, we feel. It's all of those things. So when we build a world and animate systems and structures and legal codes and governance and how we build houses and design things that are all from that way of thinking and being, there will be a precessional effect from that. I don't think it takes much to think about what that precessional effect is, because most of us are smart enough to know that infinite growth on a finite planet is mathematically not possible for a start. Most of us know that we cannot keep extracting to extinction. We cannot keep colonizing. We cannot do all of those things. So from a syntropic point of view, what do we do? Because this is, and what do we do? And please hear me, I don't have all the answers. I'm sitting constantly in the questions, but some of the things, so there's some of the things that I recommend everyone can do. First and foremost, begin to apply the principles of the way nature works. So begin to apply some of these principles. We teach a lot more about these things in the Syntropic Masterclass, the Foundations program. Many of you have done it. But begin to think, what's the whole, where do I need to go to start understanding the whole system? The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, a great idea, but that propagating, parting, parts, the silos. You cannot solve poverty unless you solve every single one of the other Sustainable Development Goals. And to even be under the delusion that you can solve poverty without solving all of them is wettico. To be clear, there are people who need food today and shelter today. So we need to have an on-ground response today. But if we want to end poverty, if we want to raise the opportunity for human dignity, you've got to look at the whole United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as one thing. And that it's a system problem, not a part problem. So that's a practice. It's a practice. How do I understand this from a higher level of, this is the generalist, the comprehensivist, but how do I also begin to understand it? How do I understand, how would someone raised in a different way of thinking? Well, not only how would they, but why aren't they sitting down? We need more of them here. Why aren't they sitting down at this table? teaching us how to see and engage with the world? Why aren't we inviting those voices missing to the spaces and the places where we're really considering new models and new maps and new mindsets? That's a practice. Understanding the source idea behind things, another practice. Please, the moment we feel helpless and hopeless in a system is the opportunity to go back and understand the design features of the origin of that system. You know, when I spent most of my younger life as a single mum, you know, raising a kid, and it was tough. And I felt in the earlier part of my life, I felt that there was something wrong with me because I couldn't create a sustainable, viable existence. Something wrong with me. And so because I went back, it was like, I don't want to be helpless in this thing. So I needed to understand the source idea of money, of finance, of the economy, economics. The economy means care for the home. But I needed to understand. And in understanding that, I recognized there was nothing wrong with me. I was one of those, there's 90% of the wealth has gone to, and I'm not entirely, but it's a great example. I was one of those, the 90% has been moved from to the 1%. And let's blame the welfare people for the issues of the world. Takers, those takers. That's how I saw myself, as wrong. While the biggest rape and pillage was going on and continues to go on, I made myself wrong in that. And it helps to keep this alive, to have people feeling small, hopeless, inadequate, incapable of making a change. It actually helps this machinery to keep going around. But the moment you realize the pattern integrity and the system and the game that's being played, it's like, oh, I see that now. And so in order to build a new boat, you know, that makes the existing obsolete, we need to understand the game that we're in. We need to understand what's happening, why we're there, and so on and so forth, like my journey with understanding money and finance and so on. We need to understand that. But then we also, in order to create models that serve all of life, all life, it's not going to come from this type of thinking. It's not. I literally, you know, and I have a great love of intellect. Probably figured that out. I have a great love of spending time in conversations with people I really admire. Many of them are men. But until what they're formulating is inclusive of other genders and other thinking, I have reached a place now where I've lost all respect, which sounds really harsh. But we can't get to a world that serves all life with this thinking. Yeah. Pauline?
Thanks, Christine. Yeah, sorry, just processing what you just said, because the thought of what I wanted to share came just before that. And I really like that, you know, you're going to amplify and it looks like bring more balance in. If that's the male and narrow, you want to amplify these others as a sort of syntropic response.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Just to zoom out even more, there's syntropy and there's entropy. And the Western thing is in a state entropy, and that is speeding up, right? And there will be that threshold crossing and a shift, right?
Yeah.
And we want that shift to be more inclusive, more whole. But I think it really helps me to see that entropy is also a normal part of how the
Life.
universe operates. And this syntropy is so beautiful and inviting, and I want to be part of syntropy, but entropy is also a part of that. And so to me, that helps me not despair, right? This is a part of the natural process, and the invitation, the openness is being created for this syntropic response that is more whole systems, that is more recognizing of all life and not extractive, and has those core principles as the pattern integrity of that source idea. And that's what gives me hope. And so I'm, in terms of my response to Trump and what next, it's not despairing, because this is a natural process and it opens up what's coming next. And so I want to build more connection with people. I want to do things that don't we and they, but that builds connection as a foundation for going forward. So that's all I wanted to contribute. And I have a hard stop, so I have to go, sorry, at 9:30 exactly.
Yeah, well, we'll finish in 10 minutes. Beautifully said. The you know, who's ever played with pendulum? Pendulum? Yeah. And so when a pendulum, this is polarity, when a pendulum is way over, and the charges are irrelevant. So when a pendulum is way over one side, it's way over the other side. It's the natural thing is it's going to swing back. We know this is how it works. It's going to swing way over to the other side before it finds some form of equilibrium. Yeah. And so this, when there has been a system of domination, patriarchy, colonization, extraction, all of the things that are inherent in the Western system as the dominating feature, knowing that there's a pendulum swing is terrifying for people who have done very well in this place. It's terrifying. It is a ripping of identity and story and mythology in the United States, particularly. It's a ripping of the story of American exceptionalism. Like that story, which is seriously damaged, wrong story, because American exceptionalism also makes a bully and a power over, and so on. And so when that has been the dominant narrative and the pendulum is so far over here, there is also a level of compassion for the swing to the other side. Because every story, every ground of walking on, every identity piece is no longer going to be there in that transition. And so this wants to fight to stay the same because this is terrifying. Yeah, Richard?
Sorry to interrupt again. I mean, I've been sitting here. I'm in Bangkok, everyone, and I've lived in China. I do a lot of work in this region, and I'm sitting here in a kind of detached fascination with the conversation, which is really interesting. It's the kind of conversation that so many more people should be part of, except they're asleep. And they're asleep because the propaganda of the West is so successful, and especially when aimed at countries like China. I think the greatest fear America has actually is that China has a different model. It has a different worldview and world system. And that's becoming, slowly, it's becoming evident. And all the things that the West says about China, most of it's totally wrong. in terms of supposed documentation of things like persecution of the Uyghurs, for example. There is absolutely no evidence of any of that stuff. It's really fascinating. So I'm sitting here really quarantined from a lot of what you are going through, especially as an Australian sitting here squirming about the politics in Australia now. But Christine knows I'm a futurist, and I forecast Trump getting in 2016, which nobody liked. But then in January this year, I forecast the result of this election. I'd been talking to Nate Silver, who's an expert on polls in the US, and he said, Richard, just ignore the polls because they're going to be wrong. Look at the culture. And so I thought it was obvious what was going to happen. And so when you're embedded, you just don't see. You believe the media, and it's quite extraordinary. So I just wanted to thank you for the conversation, because it's more that we should be having.
Yeah, thank you. And it's one of the advantages of being in Australia as part of the Western world, is because we're kind of tucked, and clearly we're not tucked under anything. It's just the way geography happens in our Western mindset. So you have the global north and the global south. We're tucked in the global south. We're an island, a big island, is separated from everyone else. But we have this voyeuristic perspective. I've always considered, we can watch what's going on with the major players in Europe, and we can watch what's going on with the major players. And we're a colony. We're still a freaking colony. We're still in the colonial system, which is just crazy. But anyway, so we have that, and it gives that perspective. Doesn't make it right, but it gives us that perspective. And there's this little bit of objectivity that goes to that. It's hard to see, Richard was pointing to this, it's hard to see when you're in the thick of it. But this transition is going to happen. And because generally the way a pendulum swings, it's not going to be elegant, and it's not actually going to happen. We're not going to go from here to centrist isn't going to work. We're not going to go from here to here. There will be some form of that. And if you study history, and I like it, but I'm not hugely qualified in it, you'll know that cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles. And this is why I think Heather Cox Richardson is so good, because she speaks to the different cycles. But from a centropic point of view, some of the pieces that I mentioned on the call today, we have to, what are some of the things that we could do? Apply these principles, work together, connect back to community nature, take the time out to really understand other worldviews that look at this as a disease today. China looks at this as a disease. Please understand that. So when you listen to people speaking from a China lens, listen to them speaking as if they're viewing this through that lens. Listen to the indigenous wisdom looking at this, and listen to try and give them and stand in their worldview and see what they're seeing. When our media and the powers, we maybe have 5 of them, the powers that I mentioned, including the media, start speaking about the enemy. Who's the enemy? I've reached this place where when anyone says someone's a terrorist, I go, why? Why are they a terrorist? Because clearly the United States does and continues to do acts of terrorism. I'm not going to go in that conversation, but where this is part of any form of colonization, any form of extraction to extinction. The military industrial complex thrives on this. It's how they make their money. It's how they keep it going. So we need to question the stories that we're told. And when we're looking at designing, so the work of Syntropic World is essentially designing and building, because it's application-based, a new operating system. But there is a caveat here for change makers, caveat for people who hold a reverence for all life. Not just my life over your life, not just the brown people or the black people over the white people, or the white people over the brown people or the black people, or whatever it is. Life. If we don't begin to practice that as a central organizing principle, which is more of this, practice it, apply it to everything. A really simple example right now, there's a group of us forming what we're calling Syntropic Global, which is a sort of like a mostly women-led advisory consult. You know, the words are wrong, but Cindy is one of them. Kelly there. And I've been in the conversation about legal coding for decades, because legal coding is part of this system. And so I'm really reaching the place now where I'm going, the legal codes for whatever we're creating in the world, it has to be an almost complete ejection of this system. How, you know, right down to maybe it's just a bank account with a couple of people's signatories. I don't know, you know, because we're in that intersection between this is the world we inhabit and the world that we're creating, and we're not there yet. But we have to be designing and living the world that we want to see now, in everything, in the way that we're doing it. That is the imperative. So there is an amazing community. Some of them, many of them are here in Syntropic World. You know, anyone who hasn't, please come and join us. Yeah, we're going to be holding next year a lot more open house events and so on, so you get to know us a little bit better. But anyway, if you've got any questions or anything, I know I'm at time. Please feel free to ask, and if you need to go, then thank you for spending time with me and with us. And thank you for the beautiful comments from Richard and Kimberly and others. So I'm open to answering any questions. No, are we good? Lovely to see you, Bernice.
Thank you so much, Christine.
Yeah, Bernice and I met in person in Colleen's house.
I know,
Yay!
it was amazing.
Yeah. How good is that? And Debbie, we met too on the same trip. It was wonderful. Lucky me.
Yeah. Great to see you.
Yeah, say hi to Paul. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining. We got lots of work to do, and the world is, Syntropy is definitely the greater force. So let's go for Syntropy.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks. Are we good?
Christine,
Yeah.
I'm going to say, just yesterday, I wrote a new piece. I think I called it The Authoritarian's Playbook. I'm going to send it to you just as a laugh.
Nice.
All right, I'll send it to you now.
Right.
It's on the Virtual Activist, but that won't be published till next year, I don't think, but I'll send it to you now.
Okay. All right. Oh, lovely. Thank you. Beautiful. It's
Take
lovely
care.
to see you. Lovely to see you again.
Good to see you.
Good to see everybody. And Sarah, lovely to see you too. Take care. You're supposed to be contacting me for a meeting, Sarah, Miss Sarah. Still there?